remained defiant, repeatedly refusing to apologise for taking hundreds of pounds away from pensioners.
For millions of pensioners is going to come under fresh scrutiny when Labour Party members in just a couple of hours vote on whether or not to reverse it. And, as we've been saying, ministers are bracing themselves for an embarrassing defeat.
How can Keir Starmer justify cutting winter fuel allowance for pensioners while spending on migrant housing continues? This is the question that sent shockwaves through a live TV interview, leaving the Labour leader visibly shaken.
What about the people who have worked all of their lives, paid into the state, pensioners? How can you justify taking away up to £300? You mentioned that you are dedicated to providing a government service for working people. You must have mentioned working people at least 13 times.
We inherited a really damaged economy. We did an audit and we discovered an undisclosed £22 billion black hole this year.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. As energy costs soar and elderly citizens struggle, Starmer's priorities come under intense scrutiny. Stay tuned to see how he attempts to defend his position and whether his explanations hold water. Keir Starmer's economic promises have hit a major roadblock. The Labour leader, who once boldly claimed he could fix Britain's financial woes, now finds himself in hot water over a staggering $22 billion discrepancy in his party's plans.
But they allocated 0 pence towards that settlement. That is not the way to run the economy. So I'm not going to accept this challenge that somehow by paying that, because there's a £22 billion black hole. Last government set up the pay review bodies for the public sector. It knew that they would come back with about £9 billion worth of recommendations. Some of those recommendations came back and the government put them on the desk.
Starmer had initially painted a rosy picture of Labour's economic strategy. He confidently assured voters that his team had the solutions to boost growth, tackle inflation, and put more money in people's pockets. But those promises now seem to be built on shaky ground. The reporter, known for her no-nonsense approach, didn't pull any punches. She laid bare the stark reality. Labour's financial plans have a gaping $22 billion hole. This revelation sent shockwaves through the studio and left Starmer visibly uncomfortable. So where did this massive discrepancy come from? The answer lies in Labour's ambitious plans for public sector pay rises.
And I do again to you this morning, we commit to the triple lock, which means that for pensioners, this year an extra £900, next year an extra £460, because I want to make sure that every pensioner is better off under Labour. But we have to deal with it this year because we need to stabilise the economy.
Why do pensioners have to pay, Prime Minister?
Please hear me out. If we stabilise the economy, which we're determined to do, that means that we can absolutely commit, as we do.
While these increases might sound good on paper, they come with a hefty price tag that doesn't seem to add up. Take, for example, the proposed 22% pay increase for junior doctors. It's a significant bump that would undoubtedly please healthcare workers, but at what cost to the overall economy? This raise alone would eat up a substantial chunk of the budget, leaving little room for other promised improvements. As the interview progressed, it became increasingly clear that Starmer was struggling to justify these decisions. The reporter pressed him on how Labour could possibly fund such generous pay rises while simultaneously promising to cut costs and reduce national debt. Starmer's attempts to defend the pay rises amid talks of austerity measures fell flat. He tried to argue that investing in public sector workers would lead to improved services and economic growth. But with each explanation, the disconnect between Labour's promises and their financial reality became more apparent. The Labour leader's discomfort was palpable as he fumbled through his responses. It was a far cry from the confident figure who had promised to revolutionize Britain's economy just months earlier. As the interview drew to a close, one question lingered. If Starmer can't reconcile a $22 billion discrepancy in his party's financial plans, how can voters trust Labour to manage the nation's economy? This controversy sets the stage for an even more contentious debate about Labour's priorities, particularly when it comes to vulnerable groups like pensioners. While Starmer fumbled to explain Labour's financial plans, an 84-year-old woman was making a heart-wrenching decision in her freezing home. Her story exposes a shocking disconnect between political promises and the harsh reality faced by millions of pensioners. Picture this: an elderly woman bundled in a thermal jacket refusing to leave her bed until midday to avoid turning on the heating. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel. It's the daily reality for countless British pensioners grappling with soaring energy costs. And now, their lifeline, the winter fuel allowance, is under threat. Keir Starmer, once the champion of vulnerable groups, seems to have forgotten his pre-election promises. He stood before the nation vowing to protect those most at risk from economic hardship. Fast forward to today, and we're witnessing a stark contradiction. The Labour leader is now defending potential cuts to the very support system keeping many pensioners warm during Britain's harshest months. The numbers are staggering. Millions of pensioners could see their winter payments slashed, leaving them to choose between heating and eating. It's a cruel irony that those who've worked hard all their lives now face the prospect of freezing temperatures without adequate heating. As the reporter pressed Starmer on this issue, his discomfort was palpable. Gone was the confident politician who promised to shield the vulnerable. In his place stood a man struggling to reconcile his austerity measures with the needs of Britain's elderly population. The questions grew increasingly pointed. How could Starmer justify cutting support for pensioners while other spending continued unchecked? The Labour leader's responses became more flustered, his explanations more convoluted. It was clear he was on shaky ground. The tension in the studio was electric. Viewers at home could sense that Starmer was moments away from cracking under the pressure. And then it happened. The snap. Unable to reconcile his promises with the proposed cuts, Starmer lashed out, revealing the deep contradictions in Labour's economic strategy. This moment of frustration laid bare the growing disconnect between political rhetoric and the reality faced by ordinary Britons. It's not just about numbers on a balance sheet, it's about real people making impossible choices in their twilight years. As the dust settles on this explosive interview, one question remains. Can Starmer regain the trust of Britain's most vulnerable citizens? Or has this moment exposed a fundamental flaw in Labour's approach to leadership and economic management? As the dust settles on this explosive interview, Keir Starmer's leadership faces a crisis of credibility. The Labour leader's inability to reconcile his promises with proposed cuts has left voters questioning his economic competence. The $22 billion black hole in Labour's financial plans, coupled with the potential slashing of winter fuel allowances for pensioners, paints a picture of a party struggling to find its footing. Public skepticism towards Labour's economic strategies is reaching a fever pitch. One political commentator aptly summarized the situation. Starmer's lack of direction and leadership is a recipe for disaster. This damning assessment encapsulates the growing concerns about Labour's ability to navigate the UK through its mounting crises. As we look to the future of UK politics, one question looms large. Can Labour regain the trust of the British public, or has Starmer's performance irreparably damaged the party's electoral prospects? The answer may well shape the political landscape for years to come.